Today we are covering resume tips, 5 quick resume tips to get you started. I mean, many of you who already have resumes, you're working on them, so it's not necessarily getting you started. These are just things that are hopefully going to add value to the way that you think about your resumes and approach working on your resumes for your different roles that you're applying to, whether those are full-time roles or internships or whatever that may be. So we're going to go through, and hopefully these will be additive to what you already are doing and already know about the magic and mystery of resumes. I'm Dr. Joseph Barber. I'm the Director of Graduate Career Initiatives here at Penn's Career Services. For our 5 tips today, I've broken them down into different themes that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about templates, because people always ask if there's a template that they can use. We're going to talk about this concept of having a master resume that allows you to keep track of the accomplishments that you're making and then leverage that as you're applying for roles. We're going to talk about sort of effective skills stories. Ultimately, those are the bullet points that you're writing in the resumes, how to make those effective and impactful. We're going to then talk about the takeaways from the resumes, right? So what is it that you want the resume to say about you? It's a question I often ask people in resume review appointments. What do you want the reader to walk away with? And sometimes people have a very clear idea, and sometimes there's a little bit of uncertainty there. So we'll talk about perhaps how to strengthen those takeaways. Then right at the end, we'll talk about sort of the benefit, the pros and cons, not really pros and cons, the benefits of writing resumes versus spending your time networking. So we'll talk about that, and then I'll share a bunch of resources. So templates. So I put this out here because a lot of people in resume review appointments, they ask, is there a template that I can use for my resume? And there's 1,000,001 templates that are out there. My take on templates is that it doesn't really matter if there's a sort of a form or a format that you should use, because the formatting of a resume is only there to support making sure that the content jumps out at the reader, that the content is the first and foremost thing that people engage with. If someone, if you over-design a resume, it's got lots of bells and whistles and icons and things, then, you're drawing attention perhaps away from your experience and towards what might be a design skill, perhaps. But there's no real way to design a one-page resume so fancily that someone's going to say, this is a person that we want to interview, right? It's a very limited document, but really what it is a content document. You want people to look at the content. And so what that means is you're going to spend time on the overall format and the look of the resume so that no one really notices that at all, right? If someone says, oh, what a nice looking resume, they're not looking at your content, right? But if they say, oh, I can see how your skills, I can see these experiences jump out, they're not going to be worried about the formatting, right? The formatting has to be consistent, has to be accurate, has to have great attention to detail, but the template itself is less critical. So what is a template for a resume, right? For a one-page resume, let's say, these are the sort of the least amount of sections that you really need in your resume. You need your content information, you need education, because that's what you're drawing on right now as you're applying for things. You need relevant experience, and that can look like different things, professional, research, whatever it is, but ultimately what is relevant to the role that you're applying to can all be grouped together under relevant experience. It can be you as a student, it can be you as a student group member, it can be you as an intern, it can be you as someone who was employed in a former role. All of those things may be relevant to a role. So relevant experience is a catch-all for the things that are most interesting to the person reading your document. Leadership and community engagement, that's sort of a catch-all for things that you might be doing on the side that still have transferable skills like leadership or communication, but aren't really relevant to the role that you're applying to. So the example I often give, if you're the VP of the Penn Squash Club, most of the times that itself is not going to be relevant to a role that you're applying to, but the skills that you're using, strategic thinking, collaboration, they may all be good to showcase, right? So you might want to section that. And then skills are just sort of catch-all for those technical skills that you might have. For your contact information, just a name, phone, email, just one email. And then these days, city and state. So Philadelphia, PA is usually enough of what you need there. You don't need a street address. No one's going to write to you. And you should keep your private information private where possible. You can add your LinkedIn profile there. I would add the whole URL, but I would make sure that the URL has been customized, right? So if you have random letters and numbers after your LinkedIn URL, it means that you need to go into your profile and just say, customize my URL. No photos, no other personal information for US resumes. Education section obviously can be fairly tight as well in terms of what you're communicating, the degree that you're getting, and the institution that you're at. And so Masters in X at University of Pennsylvania, expected 2024 is really all the sort of information that you need at sort of at the heart of this section. The relevant courses provide insight into keywords, so those are great to include. The actual things that you're doing in your degree, right? So this is the degree that you're getting in the education section. You will be awarded this degree. The things that you're doing as a student in your degree should be part of your relevant experience, right? You want to make those experiential. I learned this, I gained knowledge of this, I collaborated with this, I analyzed this, right? Those, the skills that you're using, my recommendation would be to integrate those into your relevant experience. So the degree that you get is in one section, what you do with that degree is in another section. And so if we look at what that could look like under relevant experience, you could be a PhD student or a master's student at Penn. That's your job title, as it were. And then anything that you've done in that capacity, you can talk about things that you've done as part of your coursework, your capstone research, your thesis. It doesn't really matter, because what you're trying to do is pull from those experiences and identify the most relevant aspects, the skills that are relevant to the reader who's going to be looking at this, in terms of the job that you're applying to. So this part of the relevant experience, you as a student, is critical. It's especially critical if you're applying for internships, because to get an internship, you have to be a student. And so making sure that the student version of yourself comes out as part of your narrative, I think is very important. Right? So all these things are just a key part of how you're positioning your resume in that sort of template format. Because there is, again, no one template. The section headers can change, the way you order them can change. I would be more flexible as you approach it, so that you're always creating fresh narratives relevant to your reader. I wouldn't get locked into a template just because I know there's a Wharton MBA resume template that someone said is a good thing. There's nothing magical about the template. And certainly there are other sections that can be included. I'm going to talk a little bit later about a summary section and how that can be helpful, but you might need to talk about competitions if you're an architecture student that you've been part of, or certifications that are important to the role, or patents to demonstrate that you've been successful in innovating in your research, right? So lots of different ways to do that, and certainly come and meet with us at Career Services and talk about which of these sections might be relevant for the roles that you are interested in. People always ask questions about length, and so I'll just cover this in general terms. In terms of internships, usually a page is going to be what you want. For consulting, for finance, for tech, for communications roles where they need you to be concise and clear in your communication, a one-page version is typically a good starting point. And if you feel like you can fit things in one page, that's great. If you feel like you're missing things out to get it onto one page, then that probably doesn't help you. And so moving to a two-page format may be perfectly fine in that context. Non-profits in industry, especially in research development roles, you're thinking about 2 to 3 pages. Anytime that you might be listing your publications, right, you're going to need more space than one page. And so you're going to extend the number of pages that you have. Federal resumes, right, the government applications, they are looking for a resume, but it's ultimately just a giant version of your resume where you're expanding on all of your different experiences. And that's really can go in perpetuity, but many pages can do that because your goal is to touch on all of the relevant experiences from any particular experience that you have that might be specific to the role that you're applying to. So again, very broad sort of breakdowns of the length. My suggestion, rather, is to always focus on the content first, and then worry about the length, right? So make sure that you've communicated the things that you want to get across relevant to the job that you're applying to, then see what you can do with that to fit it onto 1 page or 2 page to make it look good, right? Because if you always focus on the length first, it's going to be hard for you to be as open to the idea of creating new narratives about your skills, right? You'll type something out and it will go onto 2 pages and you're like, it's terrible, it's 2 pages now. And then you'll delete that thing, but that thing might be really important, right? So content first, then worry about the length. What is a master resume, right? So in many cases, when students come to our appointments, sometimes they bring a very general version of a resume as a first sort of step to getting a review. And that first version is oftentimes what I might consider a master resume. It's everything that you've done sort of on a document, and you're trying to sort of keep track of all these experiences. I would not spend too much time trying to create a single general version of your resume, because it's not going to be customized or targeted to a specific role. It's just going to be a catch-all that sort of captures all these things that you've done, but with no particular emphasis on certain skills or experiences or knowledge areas. So in many cases, a master resume can be a great tool so that you don't forget all these great things that you're doing. Now, if you're going to create a master resume, as I said, I wouldn't worry about formatting bullet points to make them sound good, because you don't know what the focus is going to be on those bullet points until you know what job it is that you're applying to. So the way I might approach a master resume is sort of just to capture important insights that are going to be helpful not only for resume writing, but also for cover letter writing, and also for coming up with great stories during interviews, when you're giving these behavioral-based stories, where you're telling stories or giving examples about your skills in action. So as an example, if you're a master student at Penn, and you are doing a project on health disparities as part of one of your courses, you might take notes of these things in a master resume just so that you don't forget, right? Here are the tools that I used. Here are the students that I worked with. Here's what was an outcome of that, a 20-page report. Here was a challenge that I faced. Here's what I learned from that. Here's what I enjoyed. Now, these are all really important, especially when it comes to interviewing, where you're going to tell star stories, right? Situation, task, action, result, right? Those are the narratives that you might create as you're given an example of this project in an interview. But in a resume, the bullet points that you're writing are sort of mini star stories. You're going to be talking about the skills that you used and the context that you use those in and the outcomes connected with those, right? So these mini star stories are going to be still a key part of how you're presenting yourself in your resume. So as another example, right, you're a member of a student group and you're doing event organizing or event management, program management, right? You can still begin to capture some of the key skills there. None of this may be relevant to a role that you're applying to, but in some cases, some aspect of this might be. So again, you don't necessarily want to create fully formed bullet points when you're creating a master resume, because you just don't know what the focus of the story is going to be or what skill that you want to bring to the forefront. But if you are applying for a role where communication and networking and reaching out to people, cold calling people was important, then this experience might be much more relevant to that type of role. And so then you could integrate some of those skills into your relevant experience, because for that role, they'd be relevant. So this is just a suggestion so that you're not spending so much time trying to format a general version of a resume, only then to have to reformat it or refocus it when it comes to applying for a specific role that you're interested in, right? The general resume formatting and perfecting that can take a lot of time, but I don't think it has a great return on investment when you're trying to sort of finalize it, because every job that you apply to, you want to take the opportunity to customize your narrative and customize your resume for that. So if we look at a sample job description, you have to worry about this one, but it's a senior program analyst, right? And it has a general description, has some keywords. We can identify what they're looking for. They want to analyze program objectives and develop methodologies and collaborate and prepare reports and so forth. So if we look at a job description, so when you have your master resume, right, you find the job description first, you pick out a skill that you're going to try to highlight in your resume, right? Prepare and deliver reports. Then you can go to a skeleton of your resume, which basically has the different roles that you've played without any content, as it were. And so these are some of the jobs that you've had, as it were. And then you can say, well, given that I'm interested in preparing and delivering detailed reports, where have I done that in all of these situations, right? And then you can sort of pull from your master resume and begin to populate this specifically to that role that you're applying to, but based on the examples that you've captured in that master resume, right? So all of these are just examples of report writing from different experiences that you have, and they create, you're creating a single bullet point that highlights that skill across these different experiences. If we go back to that job description, apply quantitative and qualitative analysis techniques, right? So that's another skill that you want to highlight. So again, you go back to your skeleton and then you go to your master resume and you begin to pull in these experiences specific to using, quantitative and qualitative tools. So keywords like analyze, then you fill that out, showing how you use Excel to do things. Even in the student group, you might have done something that was analyzing data sets, right? So as you think about the job description and the skills that they're looking for, you can then look to the master resume and pull from that the most relevant examples to populate your resume. So you're not really rewriting the resume afresh. You're just starting with a blanker slate so that you're not having to change a bullet point that you've already written. And the reason why I think that's important is that once you've spent time creating a bullet point, a general bullet point about your experience, it becomes much harder for you to change that bullet point because it sounds good and you invested a lot of time in it, but oftentimes that's not written for the audience who's going to be reading your resume at this place that you're applying to, right? So if you spend time creating a general bullet point, you may not want to change that as much. But if you know what the example is and you know what the reader's going to want from in terms of the job that you're applying to, then you can create a fresh narrative about that example, but that is specific to your audience. So that's why I think a master resume that is unformatted is helpful, because it allows you to create these very targeted bullet points. Talking of bullet points then, let's think about some of the ways that we've sort of create these. In most cases, every bullet point that you're going to have in an experience section should be made up of 3 different components. The skill that you want to highlight that is relevant to your audience, the context in which you use that skill, and then the outcome that was the sort of the skill led to, the result of using that skill in that context. You're not going to be able to manage this in every specific situation, and especially, not everything has an outcome that's very tangible, but this is a great goal to have. Now, the skill, those are the words that you want to pull from the job description, right? Those are the words that you know are valuable, so you're going to look to showcase those same skills. The context is the trickier one, because sometimes how you use that skill is in a totally different context to the environment in which you would like to be employed in this job that you're applying to. And that's okay. You can have different contexts and be using the same skills. Where the context is less relevant, you sort of want to spend a little less time on that context, but a little more time on how you actually use the transferable skill, right? Because it's the skill that you bring with you, not so much the context. And then the outcome is a demonstrated impact that your skill has. So rather than you just saying, oh yes, I'm great at communicating, if the outcome demonstrates effective communication, you won first prize in a communications competition or whatever it is, that becomes a sort of an objective demonstration of your skill in action, right? So that provides evidence of your skill. So this is sort of what you want to be sort of working on as you are trying to create your bullet points. In some resumes that I see in appointments, right, some of the bullet points, they begin their life as very high-level, broad concepts, right? So all of these are bullet points that I've seen in resumes. And although you get the sense of what they're trying to say, it's hard to necessarily picture exactly what's going on, right? So overhauled application process and internship application timeline. That's a good description of what happened in that role. But because I wasn't in that role and I didn't see all the things that went into that, as the reader, I wouldn't really know what these things mean, right? I don't have a clear image in my head of what this person is doing, what skills that they're using, because overhauling an application process isn't really a transferable skill, right? It was very context specific. To do that, obviously, they had to communicate, they had to plan, they had to come up with a strategy, they had to collaborate, they had to use a tool, right? There's so many things that can be broken open so that you can see those skills in action. So try to avoid sort of these broad, high-level statements that don't create a clear picture. Try to go for something more specific that illustrates the skill in a way that's going to be relevant to the reader. This is the example I often give, right? So especially for PhD students in particular, the teaching assistant role, the skills that people often mention are graded exams and held office hours. Now, I've held office hours before when no one has turned up, right? 2 hours of sitting by myself, twiddling thumbs, wish I had brought some work, which I hadn't brought. So when someone says that they held office hours, that's what I picture in my head. And that's not a dynamic skill, right? That's just my own experience sort of biasing how I'm understanding that. But these are not necessarily transferable beyond the academic environment. To make them transferable, we can do a lot, right? We can make sure that people can see what we were doing when we were holding office hours or grading exams, right? And so these then become the more transferable skills. In order to hold office hours, I had to use knowledge of something to communicate with people, right? So I could focus on knowledge. In order to grade exams, I'd have to manage the process, manage the timelines, have to do it quickly. My professor wants these done in 5 minutes, and so I have to make that happen. I have to communicate with the other TAs or the faculty members, right? So there's lots of skills there that are not captured when you simply say graded exams or held office hours. So these are just things to bear in mind as you're creating these bullet points. Other things to avoid, broad terms that are, they're okay words, but they're just not dynamic or powerful. They're not sort of descriptive, right? Assisted, participated, worked. I see worked a lot, worked on a project, right? Makes it sound like work, which it was, but work isn't not necessarily a positive word. Responsible for, I see that a lot. I was responsible for doing this, which doesn't actually mean that you did it. It just meant that you were meant to have done it. So find more dynamic ways of getting to the point. So rather than assisted in the project, talk about how you assisted, right? Because those are the transferable skills. And you can still mention that this was part of a collaborative project or that you did this as an assistant to the faculty member, but the skills that you want to bring to the forefront are the things that you would bring with you to the next role. You definitely want to prioritize those. So this is the thing that I think is really important. Sort of once you've finished, you've come up with your bullet point, you've made it relevant to the role that you're applying to, you've written it out, then ask yourself, what is the takeaway that I want the reader to have having read this bullet point, right? And make sure that you can articulate what you want the reader to walk away with. Because if you don't know what you want the reader to walk away with, they're probably not going to have much of a clue either. And then once you've asked this question, the follow-up questions are, is this takeaway actually relevant to the role that you're applying to? And is there enough descriptors in the bullet point to make a clear image in the mind of the reader just with the words that you provided, right? Because obviously when you read your bullet points, you have a much clearer idea of what's going on because your head fills in all the blanks, right? Your brain says, oh yeah, I remember that, that was great. When I look at a resume, I only have those words that you're providing. And if they don't provide that imagery, I cannot create it for you, right? Or the hiring manager cannot create it for you. So these are sort of key questions that you want to ask from each bullet point that you're writing, just to make sure that it's direct and relevant to the role that you're applying to. Then you can do that for the whole resume itself, right? You can say to yourself, well, what are the main conclusions of this resume? What do I want the reader to walk away with having read this? Now, one way to do this is to create a summary section right at the top of the resume. Those are basically the conclusions of your resume. Those conclusions need to be supported by evidence in the body of the resume, right? So if you have a summary section, they can be overarching themes that are supported by evidence that you're providing mostly in the experience section, right? So if you say that you're an effective leader and change maker in the summary, I should see evidence of that in different experiences from your relevant experience section. So, these would be the types of questions that you could then pose to yourself about your resume as you're thinking about it. And the second one here is perhaps the easy one to think about. What would a recruiter say about you to the other people in their team if they were deciding on who to interview for a role, right? They have 5 candidates and they need to get it down to 3, or they have 10 candidates and have to get down to 5. What would they summarize about you to their colleagues having read your resume? Try to sort of picture what those takeaways might be. And what does the summary section look like? Again, these are broad themes relevant to the role that you're applying to, because again, if they're not relevant, that's starting off on the wrong foot in your resume. If you start off with your conclusions that don't match the role, relevant to the role, but that are, again, supported by evidence in the main part of the resume. This is not one summary, this is just different bullet points from different summaries, just to give you an example. So again, if you say, skilled in managing extensive, highly variable data sets, there should be evidence of that from multiple different experiences in your relevant experience section. So broad level highlights that allow you to input into the mind of the reader that you have what they're looking for right at the beginning of your resume. Now, for a one-page resume, it's already a summary, right? So it's going to be hard sometimes to squeeze in another summary at the top. But for a 2 to 3 page resume, the summary section can be a really great way of forming in the mind of the reader an image of you in terms of having relevant skills and experiences. Resume writing or networking. So should you spend more time polishing a resume or more time networking? And in most cases, the answer is you should spend more time networking, because the networking will make writing resumes much easier for you. So if we sort of break it down into our iceberg here, the resume writing sits upon a mountain of other things that you're doing. You're gaining knowledge about the roles that you're applying to, and then you're meeting with people in those roles who can give you a better understanding of what skills, knowledge, and experience are valuable, right? So if you're interested in consulting, you can read all about consulting in our Vault guides. And then you can find Penn alumni who are in consulting, about 7,000 Penn alumni on LinkedIn in consulting roles. And you can have conversations with them, what we call informational interviews. And then you can ask them these key questions, right? What are some of the skills that are most valuable for you to use in this role? What are some of the situations in which you get to use these skills? What are the challenges that you face? How do you overcome those challenges? And the reason that this is important, because if you listen to the way that they describe these skills, that's the language that you need to describe your experiences. If they highlight 5 skills, you can go to your resume and you can say, have I talked about those skills? But then you can say, well, how did they talk about those skills? And can I match that in terms of the language that I'm using to describe my experiences? So this makes your life easier when it comes to writing resumes. So the more that you can invest in the sort of the networking, the easier that you'll have it. And then you translate those conversations into actionable insights. And then also you can name drop the person that you met in your cover letter, right? We're not talking about cover letters today, but in that last paragraph, when you're addressing why this job, why this organization, you can throw in there, I really enjoyed chatting with so-and-so. They gave me some great insight, right? And that makes you closer to that organization because you've been proactive to engage with people. This is just a great way of thinking about using networking more efficiently to be effective. Okay, a few quick resources on the Career Services webpage. Under the Learn How to submenu, you can find Learn How to Write Resumes, right? There's a whole bunch of resources that we've included there. If you are a master's student on the Beyond Graduate School platform, they have two great videos, one broadly how to write a resume, and then the next one, how to modify your resume for each job ad, right? So creating one and then customizing it in each case. This information will be additive and provide a different perspective because everyone's going to give you slightly different advice when it comes to resumes, but hopefully this will be helpful for you. If you're a PhD student on the PhD Career Training platform, they also have a version of this focused on PhD students as well. Imagine PhD, again, another one focused on PhD students in humanities and social sciences. They have about 15 job families, and for each of those job families, they have sample materials, including resumes and cover letters, to give you an idea about how PhDs have positioned themselves for those roles. The Vault Guides, just a great, easy-to-read resume guide that's out there. Big Interview is our interview prep platform. I'm going to be talking about that on Thursday. But they also have a video curricula on writing resumes and cover letters, right? So you can just get some input from the Big Interview platform on resumes as well. Everyone likes to talk about resumes. On our Career Services YouTube channel, you'll find our playlist on resumes, including one on federal resumes, but other general resume stuff. And because you are students at Penn or postdocs at Penn, you have access to LinkedIn Learning for free. You can then go on LinkedIn Learning and also find the resources on resumes, right? Again, lots of different information out there. There's no one who's righter or more right or more wrong than anyone else. At the end of the day, it's the hiring manager who decides what they like. But focusing on your narrative and making sure that's strong and consistent, and that the content is, clearly articulated in terms of your relevance, that's really your goal when it comes to resumes.